Beyond 3D.
Good evening and welcome to this week's edition of Beyond 3D. Clint is out and about on assignment somewhere in Southeast Asia. So with me this week will be Heather Mack. Hopefully you enjoy this program. We are going to have a really great interview today. We're going to talk to a person who is a computer programmer, systems analyst, a research physicist, formerly and self-educated, a marine architect, advanced propulsion engineer for marine and spacecraft. Has his own LLC, does web hosting, book publishing, a distribution company, amateur archaeologist. There's so many different things. TV documentary, television host, former member of the United States Air Force, also former programmer at IBM. We would like to welcome to Beyond 3D, Mr. Stan Deyo.
Thank you, Matthew and Heather. Appreciate the invite.
There is just so much information that we wanted to talk to you about with your background and everything. The thing I loved about the research that you've done and a few of the shows I've heard you on is the fact that you have followed through over the years with a lot of the research, and it has really had a dramatic effect on you. And I think it's infectious when people hear you speak about the information you have. I really believe that it infects them to the point where they really want to get out there and study and do a little research on their own, and I think that's a very important point here. So we'll start it off. I guess we can go to the beginning, and one of the things I've heard you talk about is the fact that the Earth in and of itself is maybe not as old as most people would think it is. Is that correct?
That's very correct, yes. I'm amongst a small cadre of either professional or amateur scientists who have been studying the Big Bang and various other cosmological models. And we're looking at these things in light of what's been discovered occupying 95% of the universe as dark matter. And we think that the way you look at the equations that are post-Einstein is that dark matter is like a fluid that you can't see, a very fine fluid. And when it was all in the original mass, all crammed down into that little finite space volume of the Big Bang, it was so dense. I mean, imagine all the galaxies of the universe all crammed down into this little size thing, like maybe a baseball or something. And when it exploded, the electromagnetic radiation, their waves, that travel through the dark matter as a medium, these waves traveled at between 10 and 30 zeros and 10 and 60. We're not exactly sure which equation to use. But imagine 10 with 30 zeros after it. Mm-hmm. Multiply that times the speed of light. That's how fast the speed of light was in the original Big Bang. Now, why is this important? The way established science has dated in modern times the age of strata, the age of fossils, the age of the universe, is by radiometric or electromagnetic radiation coming from decay of nuclear particles, or radioactive nuclear particles. Now, the decay rate of these elements is related to the speed of light in dark matter or space-time, however you want to look at it. At the Big Bang, it travels so much faster that we can't use just the speed of light as it is today. It was so much faster, it's like an exponential curve that, 10 with 30 zeros at the beginning and up to 10 to 60, depending on which equation you look at. And it goes slower, very rapidly down to, say, the last 3,000 or 4,000 years. It has almost flatlined at where it is now. Because of that, we can say that the universe is not 15 billion years old. It's measured more in tens of thousands of years. And because of that as well, the age of the Earth and various historical catastrophes and epochs that have been put into our model of the Earth and Earth history, this can all be put down into between 6,000 and 12,000 years, including the biblical Garden of Eden, including Atlantis, all these things, and Pangea, the breakup of the one landmass into all the continents. Traditional science, using a fixed speed of light, says that Pangea started breaking up 100 million years ago, and it just gradually drifted all the continents apart. Catastrophism with the modified timeline says that at around 2200 BC, by a catastrophic meteor impact on the east coast of India at the Kutuppa Basin, the continents were forced to split apart over decades, rapidly moving to where they are now, then slowing down to inches per year, as the continental drift people say. But like the speed of light in the beginning, this separation of the continents was extremely fast in geological terms. Anyway, that's back at the beginning.
It's back at the beginning. So it's basically you're looking at, instead of the billions of years, you're talking tens of thousands of years as far as dating the Earth. I'm going to ask you a question. It's a little bit esoteric, and I'll just get your opinion on it. From what I have done studying, I have found that this Earth could have been created and dissolved or destroyed many times over, if you look at it from a reincarnation point of view. Do you believe something like that could be possible, where this is just being created and destroyed, created and destroyed?
I think you're probably relating that to the Vedic writings, or
yes.
Brahma. Brahma breathes for 150 million years, or lives and dreams, and then wakes and whatever, and the universe is created and destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
All I can say positively is that my viewpoint is based upon the Judaic writings in the Old Hebrew about the creation. I do know that this earth and this universe will be destroyed in a fervent heat and fire, according to the prophecy given to John in Revelation, and about 1,000 years plus from now, and a new heaven and a new earth will replace it. So that is in keeping with what you're saying, at least from now to the next one.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what came before. I don't know if there are any records that really survived other than what the Creator would pass to individuals here, but no written or material records, I don't think, could have survived a meltdown of the universe and so forth. But it's like saying that the existence of our virtual universe is like an oscillating thing, expansion, contraction, and creating new scenarios each time it runs through that. But again, you say that's an esoteric thing, and I agree. It's kind of hard to prove, isn't it?
It is.
It is, Stan. I actually wanted to ask you as well, I mean, on your thoughts on that. I mean, what would you say that would happen in 100 years, 200 years, 10 years? What's your thoughts on that?
When you say what is happening to what? Sorry, to which?
Sorry, well, with the Earth evolving, if it's going to destroy itself and that sort of thing. I mean, I think with what's happening today in the timeline, with all people destroying our universe in so many ways, do you think it's going to survive for another 100 years, 200 years?
Well, the universe has its own time clock. I don't think what man does on planet Earth has squat to do with it, but certainly the Earth and the universe as we know it according to the old prophecies will be destroyed or consumed and rebuilt at least 1,000, maybe 1,010 years from now. But we still have 1,000 years to organize the planet, under the Messiah into a perfect world. And then at the end, to end it all, this virtual reality is collapsed. I mean, the Bible does say in a number of verses that what we see as reality is, in truth, not reality. It's like a virtual existence. And now that we can make virtual realities ourselves in computers, we can understand that more. And that what this is not where reality is. It's in like a parallel universe, or a universe that created us as a little bubble. Our whole universe is a little bubble in that universe as a virtual creation. It doesn't affect the real universe. In that respect, then the Creator could create and destroy at will, reorganizing all this. We have sentience, humans do, and we sense this environment through these senses and these clay bodies that we run around in. But our sentience, what is essentially us, may have roots in the parallel universe, in the real universe, and we may be just injected into this, like Avatar, the movie. Did you see that?
Yes, I did, yes. I totally understand what you're saying.
Sometimes I think of it that way.
I agree with that. What do you think, Matt?
I can I can thoroughly agree with that, especially if you do a lot of meditating and traveling outside of body. I think a lot of people would agree with you wholeheartedly. Now, if in fact the Earth is, let's give it a number, 15,000 years old instead of 1.5 billion or whatever we're talking about as far as the Big Bang Theory is concerned, condensing it down, that would change a lot of things around. It would change the way we would have to think about everything that's going on today. And what I know is from your work, you have done a lot of research to back up your numbers, and I think that's very important. So when you look at the Earth changes that you're talking about, when you look at the fact that there was, and I want to really get into this, the fact that India, not just for epics and Mahabharatas and things like that, but India is very significant insofar as the meteor that hit off the eastern coast and actually moved a lot of things around. I think we should get into that aspect of things. I lived in India for a year and did a lot of studying over there, and I find that what you said, when I first heard it, I was amazed at the fact that you found that there was an actual meteor hit off the east coast of India and exactly what that hit did. So could you go over that for us?
Okay. There's just so many things that are coming to light now then that as I discover them from my kind of limited viewpoint, the hair on the back of my neck stands straight out because it's proving a lot of the ancient myths and stuff really did happen and how they happened. How the Great Flood occurred, and the fact that it may not have destroyed the whole planet, but it certainly destroyed Saudi Arabia, which was Atlantis, and it moved India, kind of northeast into China to form the Himalayas between the two by this meteor impact, and it was a huge meteor. If you were in India, like you say, this would be, let me just see if I can get the name of it would be in the Andhra Pradesh province, where the Kuddapah, the Uddapah, basin is. They call it, for years they call it a subsidence that had a rim around it. Mm-hmm. And the rim is up on land and kind of goes through to form the forest there called the Nalamala Forest in Pedarutla, Andhra Pradesh. I hope I killed that too much, but...
No, it's fine, yeah.
That's fine.
Keep going.
Okay. This forest is in the shape of a crescent, forming an outline, which looks part of a large crater. And they've been trying for the last 12, 15 years over there in India to prove that this is, in fact, an impact crater, or a rim of it. And when you look offshore, you'll see a little dent in the ledge just off underwater. A little dent that's, when I say little, it's roughly 27 to 30 miles in diameter. It's the main impact point, mm-hmm. where the meteor hit, and it formed a secondary rim around the impact zone that's 300 miles in diameter. But they could not prove it because they couldn't find, the center of the impact, which is offshore and underwater. And what I found was really incredible about this is that this impact did occur, but it occurred when India was stretched down in the Indian Ocean and connect to the east coast of Africa. And the two were just kind of separated by little rivers and stuff, but they were virtually right next to each other. Well, okay. Now, it pushed the surface of the Earth, which is, India. It pushed it up into to form the Himalayas. It pushed Saudi Arabia and Africa off to the northwest. And it stripped underneath these countries, it stripped the cratons, the columns that support, these continents to the mantle. It's a very dense kind of almost diamond-hard material. It split those and stripped off a bunch of them, shoving them underneath Saudi Arabia, up underneath the Mediterranean, and rising up under Italy and under Spain, and finally into the Atlantic to form a huge 2.3 million square mile bulge in the North Atlantic before it stopped. That's where the meteor stopped. Now, have you ever heard of the Chicxulub meteor that hit over in the Gulf of Mexico?
Yeah, Yucatan, yeah.
Okay, well, interesting enough, that one had a crater that was about 100 miles in diameter. This one over at Kuddapah in eastern India was 300 miles in diameter, and the rough approximation I did of its energy was that it was 22 times the energy of what made the Chicxulub impact.
Wow.
So it was huge, and it knocked the Earth. I've calculated the impact zone and where the old North Pole was up near Iceland, and it knocked the Earth from having a North Pole at Iceland to where it is now, 23.4 degrees off of true north, or where it should have been, from that impact. Now, I'm going to be supplying this stuff to the geologists in India to marry it with their findings, their suspicions about it, because it's so interesting that because it went underneath India and broke off part of its craton, shoving it over into the Atlantic, it left a mass void in what's called the Indian Ocean today. If you look at the NASA maps, you'll see that there's a big blue area mainly centered in the Indian Ocean off to the southwest of the tip of India, Ceylon. And that is showing that gravity is much less in that area because a lot of the mass has been moved out of the mantle. And surprisingly, but not really, there is a corresponding area over in the North Atlantic where that bulge is of increased mass and increased gravity from the mass that's been taken from underneath India and shoved all the way over towards the Atlantic. An amazing impact. And not only did it leave a little hole in the ocean off the coast of India near where the Kutubak crater is, that little 30-mile diameter hole, it left a mark of that hole in the bottom of the ocean where India used to be, right next to the Maldives, kind of up north of there just a bit. There's a little bit of a dent left in the ocean bottom there, which is where the meteor actually impacted when India was still down there. And so the meteor went on underneath the Earth's mantle and traveled over the Atlantic, while India was caused to, it blasted it all the way up into the Himalayas. And this didn't take a few seconds, it took a few years, but parts of this are recorded in one of the pharaohs of India in their unbroken timeline, which Velikovsky covers. And when the Earth was moaning and groaning, it's when the separation of Pangaea occurred, not 100 million years ago as modern science dates it, but probably somewhere around 2200, 2300 BC. And that's a big difference, catastrophic in a very short time period.
No, it certainly is.
Did I hit the point you wanted there?
Yeah. It's because I brought up my maps of India and everything like that. We're looking at them now, and yeah, you can basically see the bulge. You can basically see the curvature of the east coast of India and how that could have an effect. Now, you basically said what happened was this meteor entered in on the eastern coast of India and came up on the other side, and moving mass as it went, and the Arabian Peninsula, which is some other very interesting work that you've done. All of a sudden, the Arabian Peninsula, covered in sand right now, it used to be known as something else, I believe, based upon your research. What have you found about that?
Yes, it did. When that meteor hit under India and went under Saudi Arabia, or the whole Arabian Peninsula, on the what would be now the southern side of it, there where Yemen and Oman is, it dropped that area down by about 1,600 feet from what it was originally, because it just sucked the craton out from underneath it and pushed it over toward Europe, and of course raised the north end of the Arabian Peninsula, which is, it joins to the Levant, where the eastern side of the Mediterranean is. It raised that about 1,600 feet as well. So before that happened, Arabia was an island. Water flowed straight out of the Mediterranean down into the Persian Gulf, now called the Arabian Gulf, and it flowed down into the Red Sea through a waterway that went east of the Nile around the Sinai Peninsula there. You can see where the Suez Canal is, the last part of it. And it formed an island. The island that Plato spoke of as Atlantis was huge. It wasn't just the little capital island where Poseidon built his castle and, had children. That's a small area. And that was not connected to the main landmass of Atlantis. It was out into the ocean a bit where no one could get to it until they had developed a large shipping, seagoing vessel. The area of Atlantis was as large as Asia Minor and ancient Libya were put together. So now then you say, well, gee, how big was ancient Libya? It's certainly not what it is today. It was a lot larger, going all the way up into where Gibraltar is there into Morocco. A large part of Morocco was a part of the ancient Libyan territory. So you calculate the area of that. You calculate the area of Asia Minor at the time of Plato. Add them together, and I went through all the little bits and pieces and used Google Earth and, area sums and all kinds of stuff. The area of these two together is about 1.3 million square miles. Okay, what is the area of ancient Arabia when they had water going around it? 1.3 million square miles.
Mm-hmm.
So it agrees perfectly with the Plato accounts coming from the priests of Suez, the Thais, in Egypt.
That's incredible.
Now, the Egyptian priest who was giving this information to Solon then passed it down to Plato to write about it. The Egyptian priest said to Solon, he said, when you Greeks were just crawling up out of the mud, we Egyptians knew what was going on and were writing all this down. And here's the story of Atlantis. And he goes on to tell him. Now, that means that when the Greeks were crawling up out of the post-flood mud and they were trying to reestablish, it means that they weren't killed, all of them. There were some still coming up, and they apparently went to war with the Atlanteans before that time. And when the flood happened and the impact crater destroyed Atlantis, it pretty well sloshed water all the way through the Mediterranean and over into the North America and Canada, which were at that time still connected to Europe and Africa. So I've got Atlantis. It is there, and it was what Genesis 6 spoke of. It was the home of one of the fallen ones from the parallel world, or whatever, the little g gods that came to Earth. Plato's account says there were 12, and they took different portions of the Earth's territory, and one of them, named Poseidon, took Arabia, which is the one that survived in legend as Atlantis, but there were others in Africa, in China, and in South America, North America. They all had their portions of land, and signs of their technology do appear as pyramids and various other things all over the world. But the one that we remember most is Poseidon, who formed Atlantis. And Plato goes on to describe things like orichalcum, a special mineral metal they dug up that was malleable, and you could easily hit it with a hammer and cover rock and stone and streets and make plates out of it to eat off of. Beautiful stuff. Now, that orichalcum was a reddish gold color when they coated the rocks of the wall that went around the outer rim of Poseidon's castle out there in the island. You could see it coming in by a boat. It's a reddish gold glint in the sunlight. It was beautiful, apparently. So people have been trying to find out, okay, what was that metal orichalcum? In the Greek, ora, high mountain, calcum is copper. So they're saying it's the high mountain copper. Well, high mountain copper it can also be described as 78% gold and 22% copper. It's red gold. And India, of course, has a lot of that. Their gold jewelry, just beautiful. Rose gold. But where did you find this in Atlantis? Where was the supply of it? Well, today they have found that it's outside of Jeddah in the Red Sea. There's a project, there's two of them that have been approved by the Saudis and by the country across the Red Sea from there. I forget what it's called now, but it's like Sudan, I think it is. Anyway, they have given permission for a mining, deep sea mining expedition to go there and start mining the gold out of the Red Sea off of the coast of Jeddah. Now, the gold there, they reckon at least 1 million ounces of gold is there. And they are offshore of Jeddah, but if you go inland from Jeddah, there are old gold mines there that were mined for thousands of years. Thousands of years, they produced this gold and copper mix. There's just a natural formation there, and that was where they got this magical metal called orichalcum to coat everything with. The streets were paved with it there in the capital island, and that was produced by Atlanteans in that area. Now, if you use Google Earth, and I do, you'll be able to see over 1,400 stone formations that were made as little replicas of the capital island of Atlantis. But these are up in the volcanic ranges in the western and middle of Saudi Arabia. If you look on your Google Earth, I think they're close to Hail, H-A-I-L, on Google Earth. But I've made KMZ files, which I'm going to put into a CD-ROM for people to get from me after I do the lecture in July in Atlantis. And you'll be able to plug these into your Google Earth and fly around and see all these things that I've pointed out, which are remnants of the ancient society of Atlantis. Look, even the Bedouins in the time of, what was his name? Lawrence of Arabia, T.E. Lawrence.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote, after talking to the Bedouins, they know of an ancient city called, which he called the Atlantis of the Sands, but they can't find it because it's under the sand. And there are just numerous Bedouin legends about the old men who made all these things, the men of old, in other words, in English, telling us that they know about that. Now, we have not explored the desert of Saudi Arabia. The Arabians have done some exploration of it. But you know what they call that gold project off of Jeddah, what they've given permission for, the two projects? Atlantis 1 and Atlantis 2. Somebody there knows the truth.
Somebody knows what's going on, certainly.
Yeah. And, of course, the leader of Saudi Arabia is King Solomon. He has a son called Prince Mohammed bin Salman, mm-hmm. and a nephew called Mohammed bin Nayef. And the real power does best in King Solomon, but he's delegating a lot of the portfolios of running that area of the country to his son, Mohammed bin Salman. Now, Mohammed is about 31, close on at the moment. I think he'll be 31 in August. He is a handsome guy, a brilliant guy, and he has already organized 39 Arab countries into a union, an Arabic union, to be a military force. They've even had joint military exercise. And we suspect, well, we know for a fact that Saudi Arabia has funded bin Laden, has funded most of the terrorist organizations, including ISIS. And we think that young bin Salman is going to disarm ISIS because they're supplying the money to them. They know where all the money goes and who's running the organization. He'll make a deal with them that will bring peace to the earth where no one else could bring peace or defeat ISIS because of the way they're organized and fighting as guerrillas. He'll gain popularity for that. And we think that he will then organize them to attack Israel in a surprise attack. We don't think he'll succeed in destroying Israel according to the old prophecies, but he will do that. Now, what I'm telling you is, okay, conjecture, that he might be the Antichrist spoken of in the Bible, but also by Nostradamus. Nostradamus gave us a clue to the name of the third Antichrist, one of this age. And the interesting part is that Nostradamus coded his stuff a little bit. But when he gave the name of this Antichrist, he didn't code it very much at all. And he called him Mabus, M-A-B-U-S. And on the surface, it's hard to figure out whose name would fit that bill here. And until I was reading a news article a couple months ago about Mohammed bin Salman and his nephew, or his cousin rather, Mohammed bin Nayef, did I realize what was identifying bin Salman as the Antichrist in the courts of Saudi Arabia, because there's two Mohammed bin Nayef and Mohammed bin Salman, both up in line for the throne.
Mm-hmm.
They call one of them MBN and the other one MBS. And they do that in the news article. MBS did this, MBN did that. And MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, who has organized this Arabic Union for the first time in history, has organized an A for Arabic Union, U for Union, and his initials are MBS in consonant, and in vowels it's AU. You put them together and you got Mabus.
That's incredible. Now, do you think, I wanted to ask you, when you say they're going to invade Israel, do you think that's because of the hidden resources there, the oil field in Israel, and would they be after that essentially?
Not so much so, because Saudi Arabia, bin Salman at the moment is selling off parts of Aramco, the Arab American oil company, and he's turning the Arabian economy in a different direction toward energy of the free energy type, or the renewable, they call it there. So he has access to technology, we think, that will revolutionize the production of electricity all over the world. By controlling that and licensing that, he will become a very powerful, Saudi Arabia become a very powerful nation. They're even going to open up Saudi Arabia to tourism now, and as part of the way they will earn dollars. So they're not interested in Israel's oil so much so because Saudi Arabia has tons.
I was going to say they have their own, really.
Barrels a day.
That's certainly
Stan,
correct.
let me ask you this, Stan. Now, based on what you've just stated, could this be, it just seems to me that it is, could this be, in your opinion, one of the reasons why when President Obama went to Saudi Arabia, nothing was really mentioned about the fact of 9/11 and the 28 pages that are supposed to come out? If the government on the sly, let's say, has intel that states all of these things could be going on in the near future, wouldn't you be inclined to just keep that quiet and try to keep the status quo? And even though the people may be baying for the blood after what happened with 9/11, this is the reason why the government would basically just try to keep it all quiet?
Well, even Saudi Arabia said to the government here, to the Obama administration, if you release those 28 pages, we're going to do bad things to you.
Well, that could be a very bad thing.
Released.
Obviously, that could be a very bad thing insofar as if they have technologies that the United States has been able to get some kind of information on, and and they know that technology can actually change the world view, especially when it comes to energy, they would probably not want to rock the boat.
The bloodline.
Yeah. They would probably not want to rock the boat in a situation like that. Now, as far as Israel is concerned, I'll ask you this. It's been very interesting because with everything going on with ISIS, with everything going on with the Saudis, with everything going on in the Muslim world, the thing that I have not heard a lot about is Israel. And the fact that ISIS, who is out there going against the infidels, that you would think that Israel would be a sworn enemy, yet you haven't really heard anything about ISIS doing any kind of attacking or even posturing when it comes to Israel. What about that?
Well, because, first of all, Saudi Arabia, the Saud family are Wahhabi Muslims, like very fundamental Muslims. Mm-hmm. And the Saud family did contribute a large amount of money to Netanyahu's bid for prime minister in 2015. Why? Well, you've got the holy city of Jerusalem, where you have the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque over the site, the second most holy site in the Muslim world. So to keep peace, I think the Saudis are keeping Israel from war at this moment with the intent of taking this union they formed and eventually taking over Israel themselves and preserving the holy site there in Jerusalem and a couple of other places out in the desert that Muhammad was on the frequent for various reasons. Mm-hmm. So that's why I think that ISIS is not attacking Israel, because it's not in the plans of the Saud family. The Saud family has over $17 trillion worth of money that we can detect so far. They're very, very wealthy, very powerful. Make no mistake about it. They're running the whole world at the moment with this, with control of money and the flow of oil.
That's about it.
And it's going to become apparent very quickly.
It's a frightening thought, really, isn't it?
It is. When I was down in Australia, I went down there to join, I was part of Dr. Teller's team to make anti-gravity, that kind of stuff. My control agent was Sir John Williams there in Melbourne, of the Adelaide steamship behind that. He's an undercover type thing. And we were told that the humans had a base in Saudi Arabia, near Riyadh, in the center of Saudi Arabia, and 120 miles down the Jabal Tuwaik mountain range out of Riyadh. We had a base, which we shared with aliens, that was so security conscious that if anybody tried to go in by land or by aircraft that was not recognized by the base, they would be destroyed without question, killed, and no questions asked. Wow. We had technology that we got some of it from these alien critters, these parallel worlds, or fallen gods. The Pentagon calls them the Sumerian gods of return, but they're at Riyadh and south of there, kind of southwest of there, in the Jabal Tuwaik range, is that base, which had technology that could supply the world, if it was under control, let's say, of the Saud family, with a renewable energy source that was just never ending, and because we used them in the craft that we were building. So I'm telling you, Saudi Arabia is the center for the new energy of the world, and it's probably going to be alien technology out of the Jabal Tuwaik range. If you try to get to that on Google Earth, that area all up along the range on the west side of it is pixelated. When you get down to it, you can't see where the base is. It's all pixelated. That's the only place I've found they've done that. And in fact, a lot of the sand that you see in the Google Earth when you're zoomed out, you think, well, that's just sand. If you dive down underneath that, under 5,000 feet altitude on Google Earth, suddenly there are big patches of that are photographs that are down underneath there. The Saudi government doesn't want any photographs taken, full stop, of Saudi Arabia. But there have been some that have been sneaked into Google Earth underneath that cloud of sand that you see in the big picture. So if you dive down there and scoot around, you'll see what I'm talking about. There's all kinds of goodies there. All kinds. But anyway.
We're certainly going to dive down and scoot around now.
I'll tell you what. Beyond 333D. Stan, being that you mentioned this, and you did spend a lot of time here in Australia, I have to mention Pine Gap.
Yes.
What is going on out there? We had a person that came on our show a few weeks back, and he actually worked in Alice and basically was asked a few things when they were building the facility, and it was very interesting. There are many different theories. There are many different conspiracy theories around it. I don't necessarily hold to those, but being that you've been in that industry, being that you've been in with covert technologies and worked with governments, what can you tell us as far as you know about Pine Gap?
Well, Pine Gap, I talked to the driller who had dug what he called the water well at the base there. It was 25,000 feet down. That's a deep water well. It was also part of the grounding for the low-frequency, high-voltage transmitter there, which you could see the aerial of with a small ball on it. Some of the pictures. Desmond Ball's book, I think, had a picture of it, the little, like Tesla, capacitor on top of a tall antenna, but underneath there was several layers, floors, if you wish, down around that well, that pipe that grounded the transmitter system. It was a form of the same kind of thing that was at Exmouth, the Cape there, where they had the naval base and the Exmouth transmitter. Have you ever looked at that, by the way, on Google Earth?
I have not. I'm going to do a lot of Google Earthing this weekend coming up, yes.
Well, look, I'll tell you what, it's similar. It's a related technology out there on the Northwest Cape. And if you get onto Google Earth, I'm just trying to see here. Just bear with me a second. I'm zooming in here to see which of these things. Anyway, go up to the Northwest Cape on Google Earth, zoom down to about 5,000 feet or below, and go to the extreme tip of it, and you will see over a mile in diameter the outer ring of 13 towers that were part of the transmitter at Exmouth. Same kind of transmitter they put in at Pine Gap, but with the Pine Gap having better technology in some respects. Both of them, Pine Gap was made around 1964, I think, when they put the well in and started building the base there. But Pine Gap was doing some of the things they said it was publicly, as far as relaying communications between the Pentagon and overseas forces into Deyo, Garcia, and the Indian Ocean and into the Middle East. Certainly it played that part. But it also had nearby a rather unusual airstrip that you won't see on Google Earth. It looks just like the dirt, the surrounding medium. But certain types of large, like 747 jets could fly over and hover, believe this or not, hover over that base, that airstrip, and the floor would slide sideways, and it would descend down into the ground. The floor would shut over it, slide over and cover it, as though it was never there. And I had two eyewitnesses, two dentists that were hunting up in the ranges there of the McDonald Range, and they were camped and saw this happen with their own eyes. There's another one like that up near Darwin too. It's a base or a landing strip that disappears, or the dirt moves and you go down and then it closes over you. So we've got a number of things that are similar to that. And there's another Pine Gap type thing up in the islands of Indonesia. Or wait, maybe it's in New Guinea. I think it was New Guinea. We had that other one. Very, very secure organization. The base at Pine Gap Australian personnel were only allowed into Area C, security-wise, and then other scientists in Area B, only Americans in Area A. And the way they determined inside the areas if you belonged or not, you had to have your ID badge with a color on it, and the color stripe went all the way down around the hallways in your area. And if your badge did not meet color on the wall, then you were in the wrong place and you were dealt with. But flying saucer technology and stuff, it's quite possible. I know Texas Instruments had facilities there, McDonnell Douglas had facilities there, and they may have been producing these saucer craft that we were working on there. I know that the Aborigines that we talked to, they talked about seeing the silver, dishes, the silver flying saucers, off to the west of McDonald's, coming up and over them when they were camping. Mm-hmm. And they had humans on board, nothing little grays or anything like that. So it was probably one of ours. But so maybe they were there. My work was in Melbourne and Perth, and was in Adelaide for a short time, but most of my work was in Melbourne with Sir John's group. And when we humans got kicked out of these bases that we shared with these fallen ones, the parallel world, the Sumerian gods, whatever, ones that were kicked out in a rebellion from their universe into ours. And they used humans and human technology and manufacturing to build a technological manufacturing base for them to use. And in exchange, they gave us access to energy and various molecular devices and anti-gravity and stuff like that, but not enough that we would be a threat to them. And when they had reached the level of manufacturing capability they needed to produce their own weapons they couldn't bring with them when they were shutting through the gates to here, they kicked us out. And it was an ongoing kick out of several months to a year or two in the late 70s. And we were all kicked out of our bases by these non-humans, I guess would be the best thing to call them.
You personally had any dealings with them?
Not that I know of. Well, there was one pair of them maybe, but they were taller than us, and they give you these human-like things. They give you a creepy feeling when you're. If indeed these two were, I just met them briefly when they were coming back to the United Nations, and you feel like a canary with a cat looking at you.
Oh, God, I hate that feeling.
That's horrible.
It's a creepy feeling.
Ooh. If I can just ask another about Pine Gap again, I am getting different information, and I just wanted to see if you can either agree or disagree or just say no comment on it.
Okay.
A friend of mine that worked up there basically would say most of the American contingent would have to live in the Alice or something like that, or in and around that area. He said the thing he noticed was there was no, if you have, let's call it 1,000 to 1,200 people working at a facility, he said what he noticed was there was no such thing as a traffic jam. There aren't that many roads in and out of the Alice, so you'd be able to see if at 8 o'clock in the morning, for argument's sake, someone was about to go to work, there would be some kind of traffic on the roads. He said you never saw any kind of traffic heading out towards the base. Based upon that, we were just making up conjecture. How could you get 1,200 people to a facility on a daily basis without them using helicopters or planes or the roads, at least that we know of? And so we started saying, well, what's underground? How deep does the facility go? Could there be something like maglev trains or something under there that are getting people to go from Canberra or Sydney and dropping them off out there in the middle of the desert? Because if you had a maglev train, you can get there in a half an hour. It's no big deal. So, did you hear of anything like that?
Air traffic, so I would say that your supposition is probably pretty close to true. I mean, we do it here in this country. We've got tunnels everywhere.
Yeah, we had Richard Allen Miller. He came on the show, and he was talking about a few things. And one of the things he says, you can go from Maine to Florida underground in the tunnels. You don't have to ever once be above ground and things like that. So it wouldn't surprise me.
Well, the U.S. Air Force made no secret about it in the past. That their tunnel digger was 22 feet in diameter, and the Germans and the Japanese have got them over 43 feet in diameter now, and that's like a 4-story tall and wide hole drilled underground by these gigantic monsters. And back in the time when I was there in Australia, we had those 22-foot diameter jobbies that just tunnel right through stuff down underground, and so much of Pine Gap is underground, I wouldn't be surprised at all.
Yeah, That's the thing. I find it absolutely fascinating what we don't know, or at least what's not in the public view, and the fact that governments worldwide literally go around and they have this information, they have the technologies. What you just explained to me about Saudi Arabia and what was going on there explains a lot, as far as I'm concerned, about why the United States and the government is doing what it's doing. It explains a lot as to why Israel has not been attacked yet.
Yes.
It really does open you up. The information you have opens you up to other ways of looking at this thing we call reality, and I think that's very important. I'd like to shift for a minute, and one of the other things that you do a lot of work on is earth changes. And you've done a lot of studies on Ring of Fire, earthquakes along those lines. Now, I looked at some of the maps that you put up on your sites, and I found it very interesting on what was going on as far as the red dots off the northeastern and the northern coasts of Australia, insofar as the Pacific Ocean and the Ring of Fire. I'm finding it very interesting that California hasn't had its big one yet. I'm finding it interesting that it seems to be, at least, that the shift, the tectonic plates and the shifting is happening going in an anti-clockwise motion, which you would think if you go from, let's say, Japan, and then you come around and you get to South America with what happened in Ecuador recently, you would think the next stage, if it's going in that clockwise motion, would be going up toward the California coast. Or maybe I'm wrong about clockwise, and maybe it's a pendulum sort of a situation. I don't know. But you have done quite a bit of work on Earth changes. So, based upon what happened in Fukushima, what can you say about what's going on?
Let me direct your attention to the earthquakes in the last 24 hours in New Zealand. You've got them at Ruapeo, you've got them at White Island, and you've got them up up the coast, and down in South Island. It was in the last last week. Mm-hmm. All of that are significant quakes, and we've got Ruapeo and White Island volcanoes on one. Ruapeo's on a yellow alert 2 for air traffic, and White Island is on a level 1 yellow alert. I don't know whether you know it or not, but White Island up off the coast of North Island, New Zealand, it's what they call the zipper effect. The zipper to all the quakes going down into North Island and down into the South Island. When White Island erupts, or when there's a major quake there, it travels down a fault right down through North Island to Ruapeo and to Lake Taupo, which is, of course, a caldera. We know that caldera is going to erupt here sometime soon, I'd say within the next decade. I've been down there. I've talked with the GNS, which is New Zealand's USGS type thing. Mm-hmm. We've said things over the air that's enabled the GNS to get a big budget from the New Zealand government to put a submarine down into Lake Taupo and look at the vents that are happening, and to put early warning sensors all around Lake Taupo to warn when it's about to blow. Now, that is on the southwestern part of the Ring of Fire, and as you say, it looks like the big quakes from Kyushu Island, South Island of Japan, moving right on around through Nagano over into just north of New Zealand on that Ring of Fire, or Arc of Fire. And then it kind of slowed down, and then we saw it hit Ecuador, we saw it hit Chile, and the quakes in the last week have been kind of moving up through Mexico into little bits and pieces of it, not quite up as far as the Gulf of California yet. The last one was out to sea. Let's see. It was only a shallow one. It was southwest of Tomatlan, Mexico. It was 5.5. About 160 miles offshore. But it's heading up toward the west coast of the United States. Now, you mentioned California and the San Andreas. That's nothing compared to what's stored up off the Oregon and Washington coast in the Juan de Fuca plate. That area has a pressure built up that's well known to, when it releases, to release a Richter 9+ earthquake. And that will be devastating, because that kind of a shock there on the arc, or the Ring of Fire, will also trigger the San Andreas, and there are 6 parallel faults to the San Andreas, which will also be triggered. Now, that will strip or break into Long Island, a lot of California, when that happens. So definitely, people are watching that, and they're watching Yellowstone as well, because there's the dome under Yellowstone it's been bulging at an inch per year and increasing its rate of expansion. So we're worried about that from a technical point of view as to whether it's going to go off and damage the United States. But the Wanda Fuca plate, that's the big zipper for us. Boy, if that goes, it's going to shake up Mount St. Helens, which is building pressure again.
Oh, yes.
Yellowstone, it'll shake up about 6 other volcanoes down through Cascadia on the way to Mexico. So, yeah, there are things happening that we're watching, and I feel sorry for the professionals, the geologists, USGS and GNS and the various organizations. They can only make educated guesses about when and how bad, but those educated guesses have caused, in the United States, the government to spend a lot of money putting in extra seismometers all over Yellowstone Park and feeding by live data down to a supercomputer. I think it's now in eastern Utah at the NSA Center. And they are real-time studying all these things, trying to know when it's going to erupt. So behind the scenes, nobody is positive, but they've got enough indicators that something big is in the wind that they're letting things kind of leak out gradually to tell people who are aware, get yourself prepared for the breakdown of civilization for a while, because things are getting very tense in the geology. Things are happening.
Well, seismologists are saying at the moment that all these earthquakes is a very abnormal pattern occurring, because it's not normal with the way that they're occurring. Would you agree with that?
Well, absolutely. It gets back to how sure you are that an eruption or an earthquake is going to happen as a professional, right? As these people are. Do you remember? Let's see. It was Pinatubo in the Philippines, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Yes, yeah.
1991. Okay. USGS was there because we had a base there, right? And they were next to Pinatubo, and they had sensors all over the mountain of the volcano. And I watched a documentary where these guys were interviewed, and they even took film footage taken inside USGS headquarters at the time. And they were seeing earthquake patterns that were unusual, like we're seeing now. And they were looking at these earthquake patterns. They were saying among themselves, well, do we call an emergency and evacuate 1 million people in an Air Force base? If we're wrong, we're screwed. What do we do? We're not sure, but it could be. And finally, the earthquake signals became so dominant over the background noise and so rapid, and it showed a pattern of increasing, that they thought, we're just going to have to bite the bullet. Our jobs, our necks are on the line, but we're going to have to call the evacuation. And they did. Now, at that time, their educated guess paid off. If they had missed it, they would have lost their careers, have been nervous Nellies calling, an evacuation cost hundreds of millions of dollars, and they would have just been disgraced. So that's the fear that the professional scientists have when they're under control of their governments, or even if they're not, if they're just trying to advise the public on their own, is not to panic the herd unnecessarily. Do as much damage, if nothing happened, as if something happened and they didn't warn them.
Yes, we don't want to terrify the herd, you're right.
Entirely, but I'm just telling you the scientists are in that tight bind.
It's very difficult. I think we'll all have to buy Holly's book, Dare to Prepare, so we know what to organise ourselves with, I think.
She's got another book coming out. I'm just getting it ready for press this week. Prophetic Peril. It's about 580 pages worth, big book. And once you read that, you'll know that we're in deep, deep doo.
Oh, dear.
Deep.
Well, the fact of the matter is a lot of people, at least in the States, are prepared. But when people take precautions, a lot of other people laugh at them for whatever reason. And I think that's ill-advised. You should always be prepared. Things like that. Even just having basic first aid, basic water, having certain things in the house. A food supply that can last you for a good, couple of weeks to a month, if not more, depending on who you are. And there are some people that'll say, oh, well, you're just a prepper. You're just being a little bit over, you can't. But wait a minute. I remember this, Stan. We were down, you worked down here, you would know this. I was over in New Zealand. I was flying back into Melbourne. And what was it blew up, the plant a few.
Oh, yes.
And all the electricity and everything here went down. There was absolutely nothing. What's the name of it? It'll come to me.
And no one was prepared.
No one was prepared for it whatsoever. But I got back here and we came back down to the peninsula, the Warrenton Peninsula, went into the shops, and there was not a single thing on the shelves.
No water, nothing. No batteries, no torches, no candles even.
The Longford gas explosion is what it was called. And I remember, I flew in, I saw the thing on fire, and I was going, what the heck is going on down there? We got in here, electricity was out, nothing. You could get nothing. And so when something like that can happen, and you go, and that's a disaster of sorts. That's one thing.
One thing.
Why wouldn't you want to be prepared? And when people make fun of that, I just find it amazing.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because when in Australia we have, as you would know, Stan, bushfires, like terrible, devastating bushfires. And I'm not anywhere near, although I am near a national park where I live, but I actually organised myself a big container full of water and torches and batteries, and everyone that came into my home laughed at me. They said, what is that? How ridiculous. And I said, well, what would you do? And I put basic things like passport, batteries like UHT milk, that sort of thing that wouldn't go off, dog food. And the amount of people that thought I was an absolute idiot for doing that. And I said, well, what would you do if your home burnt down? Where would you go? Or even worse than that, I said, if there was a national disaster. And people aren't prepared at all. They don't do anything to prepare themselves.
You know, Heather, Holly and I had a farm before we left out in Miners Rest on number 1 Ross Road. It was about a 10-acre farm. We prepared that. We had a 100,000-gallon pond. Mm-hmm. We had the water pumped from that up into, we had fish in it, and we had the water pumped up to the waterfall to aerate it. The waterfall was on the next of an artificial mound of dirt we put over a 25,000-gallon double-wall concrete bunker that we built with a safe door on it to hold all of our supplies. We didn't want to advertise that to everybody, but we had to tell the tradesmen that poured the concrete, put the steel work in and things like that.
Yes.
But it taught us a lesson, because the concrete worker, he poured the thing, and he was talking to us the next morning, and he said, yeah, what are you going to put in there? And I told him, food, water, supplies, emergency stuff, where we need it. And he said, well, I know where to get mine when it happens. So the lesson in that is, and I share that with your listeners, is if you're going to do this, don't tell anybody. Just keep it in the house.
Yeah, so it won't be enough to go around, will there?
No, and people your best friends and family will be enemies when it gets hungry. They'll say, well, why aren't you giving it to us? We're relatives, or we're friends.
You just reminded me, Stan, of that Simpson episode where they went into the bunker and Ned built it and everybody got kicked out. Well, they all got in except for Ned. He got kicked out. It'll be like that, I think.
Yeah, well, there was a, there was a TV show, a sci-fi show years ago. It might have been Twilight Zone, where a guy had built his bunker for his family and him, and everybody laughed at him. And the alert came out that, war was on, and it was, bombing or aliens invaded or something anyway. And so he locked his family into the bunker, and his neighbors all came around now were beating down the door and telling him that he had to let them in because, well, we're your neighbors. And it was very, very educational into human nature. That's just the way they are.
Oh, wasn't it? I used to love Twilight Zone. That's true, and it's a lesson learned, as you said, because everyone. It's funny. I only had one friend when I did that. Out of all my friends that came to my home, only one said to me, "That's a really smart thing to do. I should do that. I should prepare water and things like that." I haven't done anything like that. So it's amazing how you do need to stop and think about this thing, because if something happened, what would you do?
Well, you'd be along with all the other people trying to ask the government
and as you said, even the Longford. And the frightening thing about that is when this sort of thing happens, and that's just a small thing, how society breaks down. There's no, well, I better leave some water for somebody else. None of that happens. Everybody grabs everything for themselves and leaves nothing for anybody else.
It's the way of the world.
Matthew, let me tell you something about America. I'm sure you are aware of this. If they declare martial law and you are known to house a bunch of food and water and lead, guns, and whatever people need, they will confiscate it and call you a hoarder.
Yes, they will.
Oh, really? Wow.
I have heard.
That's why you want to keep your mouth shut.
That's why you have to shut up. Yeah.
Just shut up and do your thing. A lot
of people I know that actually do that stuff, that live up in the Seattle area and things like that, they say they're being watched.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
You go online to buy things.
Track it.
Yeah, they're being watched. It's amazing what goes on there. They want to make sure the government has control. And if you could base it, well, there was a friend of mine who, I'm digressing a little bit, a friend of mine had a utility district in California.
I was just going to ask you about that, yes, yeah.
1,600 acres and had what he wanted, and they basically went after him, and they finally got him. And he basically gave up.
Really?
Yeah, it's a shame. It's a shame. It was a beautiful property. It was in right outside of Fresno and Visalia in California, and he did a really great job with it, but there are certain things they're not going to allow, and you just have to recognize that fact. But that's my digression.
Well, look at us. Holly and I, she wrote that book. We've lectured about it, talked about it on a zillion shows and TV stuff. Would you like to know how many people know what we've got here?
Too many.
Oh, Lord.
But no, that's just the way it goes. It's something that we have to. In one point, you hope humanity would go beyond that, and we don't have to deal with that. But even if we don't have to worry about man-made wars, there are still Earth changes going on, and those Earth changes can have a dramatic effect. And all of the people, especially in the South Island of New Zealand and Christchurch, in the last few years, know exactly how that can affect life. And you have to be very, very careful of the fact that these kind of things can happen, and that's outside of government control. This is the way the Earth works, and people need to be aware of that and prepare for it. So, leading into that,
down there, though, remember when they took the guns away? We were there. You can't defend yourself.
But here's the thing, Stan, and it's very interesting right now. I just saw an article in the paper down here. There are now more guns in Australia than there were before the Port Arthur massacre.
That's incredible.
I am not joking. I've been asked at least 3 or 4 times while I was down here to join the Pistol Club up the road. I don't think people are as dumb as they make them out to be. I think people are really getting back into it. Now, you do have to jump through the hoops and get licensed and have all of the permits and everything like that, but it's very interesting what's going on in Australia. There are more people that are more aware of what's going on in the world, and I think
Let me. I don't know whether I mentioned this to you before, but when we were on our farm there in Melbourne, or outside of Melbourne at Miners Rest, I had such a problem with rabbits getting into our gardens out the back that I ordered 2 slingshots from the States on the internet, and weeks went by and they didn't arrive. One afternoon after lunch, we were standing in the kitchen looking out down toward the barns, and we see 2 guys in short sleeve white shirts and black pants coming out of our barn and heading for the house. So I thought, well, who are these people? And so they came up, knocked on the door, and flashed their badges. They were from Canberra, CIB, I think, something like that. And they were working with the Customs Department. They said, do you mind if we come in? And I said, well, okay, fine. And they came in and sat down in the living room, and they said, you ordered 2 slingshots from the States and some ultrasonic dog collars to keep your dogs out of the cattle pens. Is that right? I said, yeah, because we leave the gate open. He said, well, those have been impounded. They're an illegal import. And he says, the slingshots you ordered actually have a strap that goes on your wrist. I said, yeah, it's stabilized. He said, well, that makes it a lethal weapon, so we've confiscated those. And they went on with the list of stuff that was just, ridiculous to confiscate and suspect us of weapons trafficking because we ordered 2 slingshots off the internet. I could not believe it. And the guy says to me, well, if you make it yourself, the slingshot, you can use it on your property here. I said, thanks. I said, you see that ceremonial sword hanging over our fireplace there, that 3-foot sword that was part of our wedding ceremony? I said, can we keep that? He says, well, is it sharpened on the edges? I said, no. He said, well, okay, you can keep that. Lucky for him, because if he'd tried to take him, I think my wife would have
killed him with it. But it's funny you should say that, because I in Thailand, I'm going back about 22 years ago, I actually bought a slingshot, and I got stopped at customs, and they went through my luggage. Obviously, it came up, and I got interviewed about it, why I wanted a slingshot. And like I was a terrorist, and I was absolutely terrified. I don't know how people smuggle anything, because I was so obviously innocent. I was just sweating like a farm animal. It was ridiculous. I was terrified. But I know it's crazy how some people can bring some of this stuff in, and I can't even bring a slingshot. What's going on?
Yeah, the way of the world.
I know, isn't it ridiculous?
It is ridiculous. And people are transporting Uzis, and that's okay though, apparently. Underground, as you say.
One happy thought for Australia. We know that the Indonesians are going to come down and eat your lunch eventually down from home.
So we get told.
Well, look, one of my sons was in the army there and did service with the SAS in Afghanistan, a couple tours. But what I have found out is that while he was in training up in Queensland, in the room next to theirs where they were being taught how to deal with the they call them something like, not the Indonesians, but the supposed Indonesians or something. They invented the name that had Indonesians on the end of it. How we're going to deal with them tactically when they try to come into Australia. In the next room over, the Army was training the Indonesian officers in how to defend themselves.
That's incredible.
I could not believe the irony of it all.
That's incredible.
Anyway, the good news is this. There's an underground network of SIS and SAS X's that have stored munitions and weapons in oilcloths and buried them in dry river beds, all across the country. So if you know a ex-SAS or maybe even a serving one, they will talk to you about it. That's where the Dad's Army of old days will be armed when they try to get rid of the Indonesian invasion.
I know an ex one.
Oh, there you go.
Not a current one, but yeah.
Well, it's interesting. That's almost along the lines of Switzerland.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Where no matter where you go, you can always get weaponry.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
Well,
you have to be able to arm. That's what the Second Amendment's about. You need to be able. You need the right to bear arms, and it has nothing whatsoever to do with hunting. The only thing you're trying to hunt.
Are you forgetting the fact that we have a traitor in the White House?
Yeah, I know that, but that's. I don't need to go there. That's besides the point. And the fact of the matter is, with the up-and-coming election, it doesn't matter which one gets in.
Oh, they're both terrible.
Not a fan of either.
Oh, Lord, I tell you what, this world is about to explode.
Yeah,
I think so. I think you're quite right.
But yeah, let's, we've digressed a whole lot, and I love it. The fact of the matter is, it's just the work that you've done, it's fantastic, and I love the fact that you've lived in Australia, because our listeners will be able to resonate with that as well, and it's very interesting, all of the information you have. I'm going to have to do another show with you down the track, especially when you start putting, now that I know you also have a publishing company, I'll have to send you my book. This is, I'm just trying to go through my notes here and just see what I have here. Yeah, I'm looking at this I heard, and this is very important, Fukushima and what happened up in that area of Japan and how that radiation is coming across the Pacific, and it's we're talking about a 9.0 earthquake hitting Washington and Oregon. You also have a situation where you have a lot of nasty radiation from the water coming across as well, and that is going to be a very serious problem. Now, I'll preface this way, Stan. It's this very interesting. I was on YouTube doing a little bit of a search, and there are actually YouTubers now that live in Japan, Westerners from Canada and the United States that live in Japan. They are actually now going around and doing the tourist information bit, and they're trying to sell Fukushima to the rest of the world again.
They're trying to sell Fukushima to who?
To the rest of the world again. Everybody come over, take a visit. It's a really nice area, etc., etc. Based upon what...
I access what's called a sea surface temperature anomaly map, one of the government facilities. I think it's NOAA, the one I use. Mm-hmm. And it tells you the anomalous temperature changes up or down in the sea surface temperature all over the world. And off of Fukushima, in the last month, I've been watching 3 areas. They're big. They look like big neutral zones or hot zones floating off of the North Island and heading toward the Aleutian. And I swear they must be something to do with hot water coming out of the reactors and getting into the ocean or heating it up somehow. They're not connected. They're 3 separate, just large areas, bigger than, I think they probably all, if not 3/4 of the area of Japan would fit into one of these big circles of temperature that's floating out there in the ocean.
Wow.
Something's going on.
Yeah. And hopefully we'll ultimately one day find out. It won't be too negative, but I kind of sort of doubt that. Another thing I wanted to go over with you is sun cycles, and how, in my opinion, at least from what I've seen, because I do a little bit of astronomy and things like that, they seem to be slowing down or declining. Any information on that?
Are you talking about the sunspot numbers?
Yeah, the numbers.
Have you noticed that although the numbers are down for this cycle 24, and we had a double peak in it, the numbers are down and diminishing, but the flares and the CMEs have been surprisingly there, in coronal holes and super solar wind. even though the number count is down, we're getting a lot of extra radiation out of the sun. Have a look back and see how many of those we've had. I mean, the sunspot number is those little bitty magnetic, black spots up there. But when you get one that's taking up a swath from the northern hemisphere of the sun to the southern hemisphere, and it's probably bigger than all the sunspots we've ever counted, and that's a coronal hole, it's called, instead of a sunspot chasm, and it's emitting solar wind particles at us at high speed. And the threat of a coronal mass ejection that will cause an EMP all across the planet. I'm worried about the sun. I think it's going through a phase state change from the hydrogen cycle to the helium cycle. And get this now, Matthew, you're an astronomer. Okay, the age of a star might be measured in classical science in billions of years. But if you condense that down with that adjusted timeline I'm telling you about, the sun could go nova in 1,000 to 1,500 years from now.
Wow.
That's the thing. I think that's extremely important, and it all depends on how we're measuring time. And I'm very interested in what's going on out there and up there. Some of the things that I've seen happening around the sun have been very interesting of late. And that leads to, I'm wondering, why would government officials say that the sun has nothing, that global warming has nothing to do with the sun? It's more about human beings.
That's ridiculous, yes.
You guys know that the cow gas, of course,
yes,
causing the increase in temperature on Mars, Venus, Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn, and all the other planets that are increasing in temperature, don't you?
There you go. So we have that.
What a lie.
Oh, tell me about it. What about? And then we have the pole shifting. You mentioned that a little bit, the pole shifting, and how that's going to have an effect going forward as well.
Link that to the sun. Okay,
exactly.
You're talking about the sun's peculiar behavior. This cycle, of course, is the first time that they paid close attention to the rate and timing of the magnetic pole reversal in the sun. Normally, it's a 11-year cycle, 22 for complete cycle, where the north and south pole of the sun flip, and then they flip again after 11 years, and that's the Hale magnetic cycle. This time, they measured, they found out, hey, the north pole of the sun became a south pole, and for 3 or 4 weeks, there was a south pole in the top and a south pole in the bottom of the sun. There were two south poles. Okay, then the south pole says, oh, okay, I'll flip now, and it became a north pole. NASA, in their modeling of the Earth's magnetic field and how it might shift and invert, how it does, they model on a supercomputer with fluid dynamics, and their model showed that we have at least 2 pairs of north-south poles inside the planet, and possibly 3 during a pole shift, where the north would shift at a faster rate than the south pole, and there would be another north-south pole pair floating around in between. We would have 3 of them in the core of this planet, moving around and moving magma up and down. And it's not just the magnetic field you got to worry about; those physical movements of the magma down there. The molten core is going to put pressure on the mantle, and earthquakes and volcanoes.
That's it. Absolutely. It's absolutely amazing. But Stan, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on Beyond 3D this evening. And guys, his website is www.standeyo.com. We will put everything, all of the information, up on the Facebook page. Stan, if you have any new news or information coming out that the listeners might want to know about.
Well, other than Holly's book and the 2 lectures I'll be delivering in July, that's kind of all that we're doing at the moment. And there's a lot of work involved in it, a lot. So when that's done, after the middle of July, then we'll take a new tack and see what comes up. But keep an eye on our front page as we discover new things along the way. I put them up on my show images page, which you can link to off the main website page. And I change that probably every week when I do my hour show with the Hagman Group.
Beautiful. Well, Stan Deyo from Beyond 3D from us, we thank you for your time this evening, and we look forward to speaking to you again in the future. So we've greatly appreciated this. Thanks, Stan.
Thank you.
Thanks. Cheers, mate. Bye-bye.
Beyond 3D.
Thank you for listening this week, and next week we will return with another edition of Beyond 3D. So for myself and for Heather, take care of yourselves.
Just because you haven't experienced it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.